Good morning. My name is Ann Chamberlain. Welcome to the Numismatic Theater of the American Numismatic Association. This morning we're going to have a talk by Len Augsburger and Darrell Lowe on the San Francisco and Carson City Liberty seated coinage. Gentlemen?
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. And our talk today will discuss some of the history behind San Francisco and Carson City coinage from the 1850s into the 1890s. We do have a lot of material to cover, so I would suggest to keep the questions to the end of the program. And we will also have some coins for everybody to take a look at after the program is over. Okay.
Good morning. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the story starts off in Hanover, Pennsylvania in 1785. Christian Gobrecht is born to a German family. He exhibits a great deal of mechanical and artistic ability as a child. And as a young man, he makes his way to Philadelphia and quite boldly applies for the position of chief engraver, which he does not get at that time. And then he's working privately in Philadelphia as an engraver, also doing side jobs for the mint until 1840 when he gets the appointment to the chief engraver position. He first applied unsuccessfully for the mint engraver position in 1823 and did not receive it, but worked independently in the Philadelphia area, also doing side jobs for the mint until 1840 when he was appointed chief engraver. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is an example of one of the mint medals he did. This was done for the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. This is a museum that still exists today, and these medals were awarded by the museum for scientific achievement. He engraved the Franklin obverse, and then the reverse was engraved when the award was actually made with specifics of what the accomplishment was. Next. Okay, so much later on, we have the Hanover, Pennsylvania Numismatic Society recognizing their heritage and wishing to honor Gobrecht in a series of medals. These started in 1966. And you'll notice that the reverse is modeled after Gobrecht dollar, and all of these medals essentially recreated some of Gobrecht's work, either a mint medal or a US regular issue coin. Now what's interesting about this reverse is it's almost identical to the reverse of the Gobrecht dollar, and you'll see that the Hobby Protection Act was not observed with this coin. There's no copy on there anywhere. So what happened was the FBI came down to Hanover and they seized a lot of these medals and they effaced the $1 on the reverse. But there's still a few out there that are as made. So this series lasted about 16 years, and they recreated some of Gobrecht's mint medals and some of his other work. So this is a nice go-with item for any seated Liberty collector. Okay, next. Okay, so we have, at the time of the seated coinage being introduced, there's a lot of transition in the mint. Franklin Peel, who worked for the mint, went over to Europe in the 1830s and brought back a lot of modern technology, one of which the most important pieces was the steam press. And the advantage of the steam press was that it was much more productive in terms of producing coins. You could do it much more quickly than with the screw press. And secondly, it didn't require as much maintenance, so you could produce a lot more coins with a lot less people. The screw press, just to give you an idea of how primitive this was, it was literally a big screw with a big lever on top that people just manually pushed around. And the coins were literally squeezed more than struck. And if you were the person who had to feed in the blanks under that and then eject them, you would probably lose parts of your fingers, as a lot of the people in the London mint did. Now, Adam Eckfeldt had introduced an automatic feed mechanism, so we never had that problem here, but traditionally, working with the screw press could be rather dangerous. Okay, so there are a few flavors of this metal. This one is dated March 23rd. The hope was that they could introduce the steam press on February 22nd, which was Washington's birthday. That failed to happen for various mechanical reasons. So there's a flavor of this medal with February 22nd, another with March 23rd struck over February 22nd, and a final version made from new dies that has March 23rd without the over date. There was a whole set of these in a recent stack sale for anyone who's interested in reading up more on it. Okay, next. Okay, so along with the transition of bringing in the steam press, there were also some things going on in die preparation, moving from the bust coinage to the seated coinage. So in the bust coinage, the central figure was hubbed, but everything else, all the lettering, all the legends, the dates, the dentals were all put in by hand. And in seated coinage, we moved towards everything being hubbed except the date and the mint mark. So for the later seated coinage, the date and the mint mark are the main tools for die identification. But there's an in-between here, and this is the early no-drape coinage of the seated era. And in these coins, the stars were punched by hand. And then when we get to the with-draper coinage, the stars are actually in the hub. So we got the idea that die identification on these no-drape coins could be made literally by the star placement on the obverse. And this actually turns out to be true. So there are also a few exceptional cases of this, and in many cases the stars are quite close together. They are different, but it's hard to see via the eye. This is a notable exception. This is the 1839 Odime, Fortin 105 variety, obverse 3. And you'll note on this coin that the stars on the left go down much further than the stars on the right. So this particular die can be identified immediately by that. Now, we've looked at this for the dimes. It's probably true for the quarters and halves as well, that the no drape coins have stars in different locations. So that's something that remains to be explored. If anyone's interested in that, I'll be more than happy to talk with them about that afterwards. Okay, next slide. Okay.
So the gold rush of 1848 brought several people into San Francisco. And the main reason why people were coming to San Francisco was because it was a major waterway port, as well as being a supply depot for the various people there. Now, to give you a flavor of how much San Francisco grew, in 1847, the population was about 500 people. By 1850, it was 25,000. And by 1855, it was 55,000. So within a span of 8 years, the population grew by a factor of 100. Now, with large gold bullion shipments going out to Philadelphia, there were several problems. One problem was obviously the gold being transported, so there was a security issue, as well as a cost of transporting the gold 3,000 miles away. Another lesser-known fact for gold coinage was that the Philadelphia Mint didn't even have the capacity to mint all these coins up. So Congress decided in 1852 to set aside $300,000 to build a San Francisco Mint. That's the first San Francisco Mint. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the first San Francisco Mint was established in 1854. Okay, and that lasted until about 1874 when the second San Francisco Mint was established. And here's a picture of the second San Francisco Mint following the 1906 earthquake. It was one of the few buildings that still stood after the earthquake. And the building is only located a few blocks away from our convention center here. Now, this second San Francisco Mint lasted until about 1937 when a third facility was expanded to hold all the San Francisco, the mintage of all the coins there. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I guess with San Francisco coinage silver coinage starting in 1855 with the arrows, I'll talk a little bit about what the background is for having the arrows. Now, with the discovery of gold in the 1840s, the relationship of gold to silver changed drastically, and silver became much more precious, and it was actually worthwhile to keep all the silver coinage and melt them for a profit. So, the Act of February 21, 1853 reduced the weight of the half dimes, dimes, quarters, and halves. And curiously, the dollars were not changed because the dollar was considered according to according to Q. David Bowers, the dollars were considered the key of the largest silver dollar coinage, and they didn't want to change the coinage, I guess the content of the coinage for just the dollars themselves. So it was just the half dimes and half dimes, dimes, quarters, and halves that had arrows on the sides of the dates to denote that the coins had a reduced amount of weight to it. Okay, in regard to the quarters and arrows for 1853 and 1854, rays were also added to the back of the coins, and that only lasted for 2 years because the theory is that the dies themselves, they had difficulty making the dies with the correct design detail with the rays there. Okay, so here's an example of an 1855 S quarter from San Francisco from the first year of silver coinage. And it's actually one of the nicest coins that exists. Okay, next. Okay, here's another example of an early San Francisco coin. It's from 1856, a San Francisco piece. And the early San Francisco coinage circulated very heavily, which is why finding higher grade pieces is very difficult for silver coinage. Now, the cents, 3 cent silver, and nickels were seldom used in California at this time, which also placed further stress on the dimes and larger silver denominations. Okay, next slide. Okay, here's another example of a beautifully toned 1857 quarter from San Francisco. Okay. Okay, next slide. Okay, and this is an example of the 1859 silver dollar from San Francisco. Again, a difficult coin to find in high grade. Okay, next. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about these branchment proofs that came out at the beginning of the San Francisco coinage. There are a number of these, including a 54S20 in the Smithsonian, and also the $3 proof that indicate presentation pieces were made when San Francisco began operations. And as it turns out, 3 of these are on exhibit out in the hallway if you want to go have a look afterwards. The quarter is apparently unique. There's a auction citation from 1886, and it was displayed at the Long Museum in Philadelphia, and there was a piece of paper that went with it that said this was the first quarter struck in Philadelphia. It does match the first Briggs die, so probably the first coin off the press. And it was largely unknown until 1965 when it started appearing with some regularity in the auctions, and most recently sold in the Richmond sale this spring. Okay, next slide. So there's a companion piece with this, the 50-cent proof for the same year. Unlike the quarter, it's believed there are 2 or 3 of these. Wiley and Bugert suggest 3, and besides this coin, which is on display outside, there's also one in the Smithsonian. The 25 cent and the unique 25 cent and this coin have traded as a pair recently, which is a nice historical thing. Okay, next slide. Okay, so comparing the Philadelphia and San Francisco mints going into the Civil War era, what we find on the Philadelphia side is that they cut back operations drastically. And what was going on was that there was a complete lack of faith in the paper money that the government was issuing at the time. And this, unlike previous paper issues, this was the first time that you could not take your paper back to the government and have it redeemed in specie. So the hard metal dropped out of sight, and the Philadelphia mintages dropped accordingly. And on the West Coast, the situation was quite different. Metal was still circulating, so we see the value of what was coming out of the San Francisco mint actually exceeds what's coming out of the Philadelphia mint. And this also explains a lot about the condition of these coins today. The Philadelphia coins were all hoarded, so as a result, most of those early Civil War years in high grades are fairly available. Not so with San Francisco coinage. This circulated heavily, and it is available in circulated grades, but in higher grades, many of those issues become condition rarities. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is an example of a 61S dime. And these were coins that circulated on the West Coast. On the East Coast, it was a different situation. We have a lot of other forms of money appearing at the same time, fractional currency, and a lot of private merchant notes. And even though it was technically illegal for them to do that, it was just a need of commerce that they issued their own scrip. So as one author pointed out, the saloon keeper, the cigar dealer, and the barber are all in the banking business, all creating their own money. Okay, next slide.
Okay. So with the beginning of the Civil War, there was a certain religious awakening coming on into the country. And there is a documented letter that Reverend Watkinson from Pennsylvania sent to Secretary Treasurer Salmon P. Chase, which asked Salmon P. Chase to add a motto, a religious motto, to our coinage. So and that happened in November of 1861, and within a month after that, in December 1861, patterns were being coined with the motto, God Our Trust. Now, in 1864, Congress enacted a bill to place in God We Trust onto the 2-cent pieces. And then in the act of March 3rd, 1865, it was mandated that all silver and gold coins of sufficient size would bear the motto, In God We Trust. So that covered the larger size coins, which would be the dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollars, as well as the half eagles, eagles, and double eagles. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's an example of a with motto coinage, an 1872 S dollar. Actually, the San Francisco only has 3 different seated dollars, and you've seen the 59S, the 72S, and then there's also the very rare 70S dollars. Now, this happens to be the Amon Carter specimen of the 1872S seated dollar. Okay, next. Okay, so the Comstock Lode of silver was discovered during the 1860s, and this led to a lot of silver being mined in the Carson City area. And with that in mind, we had discussions about having a mint and an assay office set up in Carson City. Now, a proponent of having a mint there was Abe Curry, and he was actually very passionate about the Carson City area. He had built a hotel, he had built a firehouse, and he had even built a roundhouse for the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. So I guess he was lobbying during the 1860s, he was lobbying Congress to build a mint in Carson City. So in 1866, the first stone was placed onto the area, and in 1870, the coins were first minted from Carson City. Okay, next. Okay, so typically Carson City coinage, especially the dimes and quarters, come with very porous surfaces. So here's an example of an 1873 Carson City dime. Okay, a nice example that has relatively little porosity. But the reason why there was porosity in the dimes and quarters was because many of those dimes and quarters were minted with 100% silver instead of the typical 90% silver and 10% copper composition. So that made the design wear a little bit faster and also allowed the environmentals to attack the surfaces more, which is why you'll find a lot of dimes and quarters with porous surfaces. Now, in terms of the half dollars and dollars, though, and as well as the quarters, those didn't have as many problems. And we still wonder why it was only the dimes and quarters that had a problem and not the half dollars and dollars. Those were produced with the correct copper composition. Okay, next. Okay, so there's two ways to distinguish the rare Carson City dimes from 1871 to 1874. Okay, and one of the methods is through the CC dime mint mark diagnostic, which should be right over here. Right over here. Okay, and then the second way that you could tell a Carson City dime is due to the reading of the coin. Okay, the Carson City dimes have only 89 reeds, whereas other seated dimes have well over 100 reeds. Okay, next. Okay, so here's a picture of the Carson City Mint from the Mason's Coin Collectors magazine of April 1885. Okay, next. Okay.
Okay, so as with the San Francisco Mint, there appears to have been some presentation coins that came early out of Carson City Mint. And we're looking at a highly proof-like 1870 cc dollar here. There is an auction citation as early as 1882, noting that some of these early cc dollars came proof-like. That sale was not plated, so we cannot say these two coins are the same, but it's possible. The Carson City proof-like dollar sold for $1.75. And by contrast, the Philadelphia proof of the same year sold for $1.05. And in some of these sales, you'll even see some of the proof coins selling at face value. Okay, next slide. So in looking for some additional evidence of presentation coins of 1870 from Carson City, we looked through some of the newspapers. And the first piece here, I think, really characterized the spirit of Carson City. It was really an upstart backwater affair. They took several years to get the mint going, and it was a really big point of pride when they got the first coinage out of there. And then this second piece here describes the first shipment of silver dollars being taken down to the depot for shipment. And a story perhaps apocryphal of someone who attempted to commandeer the coins and was apparently unsuccessful. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the proof-like coinage continues, and sometimes these are probably more just die characteristics than indication of presentation coins. The 76 cc quarters, for example, can be found in highly proof-like condition. I looked at a coin on the floor yesterday that was just incredibly mirror-like 76 cc quarter, very sharp, and had claims to a presentation piece, except for the fact that there were clash marks on the dies. So you would expect presentation coins to be the first one off the dies, but some of these 76Cs come this way. Next slide. So by way of contrast, these will come frosty as well, and you can see that especially on the reverse with this coin. Okay, the 70S coinage. A lot of interest in this area lately coming from the research of Nancy Oliver and Richard Kelly, some of which they presented in the May number of the Numismatist. So I'm going to quote from that liberally. So I want to make sure we give them credit right now. Okay. So the story of the 1870s begins in 1869. The dies are ordered from San Francisco, and a fairly full set of dies arrive from Philadelphia. And they begin coining the gold dollars. They run off a couple thousand of them. And then they discover that the gold dollar and $3 reverse dies don't have mint marks on them. So they write back to Philadelphia and saying, you know, we got these dies without any mint marks, what are we going to do about it? So Philadelphia writes back and says, okay, we're going to ship you new dies. We want you to ship us the old ones back and melt anything you made and recoin it later. Now, about the same time, you have the cornerstone ceremony for the second San Francisco Mint happening. And this was a big event. There were thousands of people there, and the mint was desperate to get their coinage into it. So what they had done was they had taken the reverse die of the $3, the first one that they got, and hand engraved a mint mark into it, and went ahead and struck it off and put it in the cornerstone. Now they get this correspondence from Philadelphia that says, we want that die back. So the San Francisco Mint kind of has to fess up to what they did. So they include a note with the die that say, you know, just so you know, we hand engraved this mint mark on here for inclusion in the cornerstone ceremony. And so now, several days later, there's another piece of correspondence from San Francisco acknowledging the receipt of these new reverse dies from Philadelphia. Now, interestingly, the shipment from Philadelphia contained the $3 reverse dies, the $1 gold reverse dies, and the $1 silver reverse dies, which was significant because Philadelphia had not previously shipped any of the silver dollar dies to San Francisco. So now they have this $1 silver dollar reverse die in their possession. And the justification from this was from Philadelphia was that, well, you said you didn't have dollar dies, but you didn't say gold or silver, so we're just going to send you both. So now we have this silver dollar reverse die in San Francisco, sometime around the minting of the cornerstone. Now here's the key question about this coin, and that is the mint mark. Is the mint mark hand punched, or was it engraved like the $3 gold piece? Now Kelly and Oliver, in their May article in Numismatists, basically follow the hand punched theory here. And that theory goes, okay, we have the record that this reverse die was shipped from Philadelphia. Philadelphia had known that mint marks were missing, so they probably took care to, you know, make sure they were punched on there correctly. But then they don't have the obverse die. So Kelly and Oliver hypothesized that the obverse die was borrowed from Carson City. And this is plausible for a couple reasons. First of all, it's known that San Francisco and Philadelphia exchanged dies. And secondly, Carson City had more than enough obverse dies for their 17cc dollars. There were only 12,000 struck, and I think they got 4 or 6 dies from Philadelphia for those. So that's the hand punch theory on the mint mark. Now, the other alternative is that this mint mark was engraved by hand. And most of the catalogers of this coin, if you look back at the sales of the last few years, lean towards the hand punch theory, or the hand engraved theory. So let's go forward 2 slides actually. So here's the mint mark. It's not terribly clear from this photograph, but again, there's a coin outside. I should also mention now that there's a 1870 Yes exhibit outside with the dollar and the $3 and the half dime in it. So the hand engraved theory is things get a little bit murky with this because we don't really know where the dies came from in that case. You would have had to have had a set of dies come from Philadelphia, San Francisco do the hand engraving on the dies, and then striking off the coins. So you look at these coins outside or you see one in an auction, that's the first part of the coin you want to look at. Okay, let's go back to the reverse. All right. The next mystery about this coin is the circulation of these. Now, there are about 10 of these coins, and with the exception of one, the Stack Rudolph Legend specimen, which happens to be outside, they're all circulated. Now, this is in contrast to the situation with the 94S dime 24 years later. Same thing, about 10 different coins, but almost all of those are new, and there's only a couple that are circulated. So if these were presentation coins for the cornerstone ceremony, you would expect that a lot more of them would have survived in higher grade condition. So another mystery about 70S dollar. Let me also talk about 70S half dime a little bit. This coin was unknown until the late 70s when it showed up at the Orland Park coin and stamp shop in Orland Park, Illinois, which is a suburb south of Chicago. A gentleman walked in with a cigar box of just miscellaneous material and sold it. And the owners didn't realize what was in it until they carefully looked through the coins later. And from there, the coin was subsequently distributed with the brokerage help of a big Chicago dealer. And since then has traded somewhat regularly, last appearing in Baltimore last summer. Okay, next.
Okay, so with the act of February 1873, arrows were added back onto the quarters, half dollars, and the dimes. Now, the reason why the content was increased in silver coinage during this time was that the U.S. wanted to conform to the metric standards of weights and measurements. So the silver coinage had an increase in silver content, but the silver content really only was increased by 1%, which was the tolerance of the coins anyway, so it really wasn't much of a deal in terms of the amount of silver content that was added. Now, the half dollars, they were increased to 25 grams, and that was done to be able to match the French 5 franc coin in commerce, and they were hoping that U.S. half dollars would also take off as being an international piece of commerce to be used. Now, the trade dollars were also created through this act, and this was created to compete with the Mexican coinage in Oriental commerce, and you'll find plenty of trade dollars that have chop marks on them, which signifies some kind of authentication from the Chinese authorities for these coins. Okay, next. Okay, so the Mint Act of February 1873 also abolished the coinage of 2 cents, 3 cent silver, and half dimes, and there was a huge need for a small change in the West. So a bill was enacted in March of 1875 to produce the 20-cent denomination. Okay, and despite having a plain edge, people were still confused about the 20-cent piece with the quarters. So it's not unlike what we have today with the Anthony dollars and the Sacagawea dollars, where everybody's still confused with the quarter denomination. Okay, so in 1878, the 20-cent piece was repealed. But during those 3 years, you can go ahead and change the slide. Okay, there were several rarities that were created. One more slide. Okay, we have the 1875S Branchman proof, of which about 12 are produced, and currently there's about 6 that are known right now. There may be a few more that people don't realize are Branchman proofs. The other coin is the 1876 CC 20-cent piece, which is considered a classic U.S. rarity in that 10,000 were minted, but many of those coins were melted in 1877, 1878, which leads to today's population of maybe 20 coins that are known. Okay, next. Okay, so starting around 1875, the Specie Payment Act was declared that larger quantities of silver coinage would be issued to redeem fractional paper money. Now, in 1875, the U.S. Mint purchased $9 million of silver bullion, and by 1876, it was already $15 million worth of silver bullion for the year. And the government purchased it at a 13 to 15% over market value. Now, obviously, the background to this is because the silver miners had a large interest out in Washington, D.C., and to appease the silver miners who were producing large amounts of silver, they were able to affect legislation to purchase silver. Okay, next. Okay, so here's some examples of silver coinage from that time period. Here's an 1876 quarter from San Francisco. Okay, this is a coin that you'll be able to see in the showcase after we finished. Okay. Okay, here's also another beautiful piece from 1877 for San Francisco. Okay, so the Bland-Allison Act was passed in February 1878 that mandated that the U.S. Treasury purchase between $24 million and $48 million worth of silver per year for coining silver dollars. Now, the reason why silver dollars were specifically included was that it took more effort to produce 2 half-dollars or 4 quarters or 10 dimes. So by coining silver dollars, the mint was able to produce many more faster. Okay, also, the Secretary of Treasurer, John Sherman, he suspended production of subsidiary coinage in February 1878. So that's why you'll see the mintages for 1879 to 1890 coinage being relatively low. However, dimes were necessary in commerce starting in 1882, and San Francisco produced dimes from 1884 onwards to 1891. Now, the Sherman Act of 1890 repealed the Bland-Allison Act. Okay, so here's an example of Mason's Coin Collector's Herald from June 1880. And right away, you can see that the 1879 halves, quarters, and dimes already sold for a nice premium within just a year of being issued. So people didn't know that those coins were difficult to find. Okay, and here's a nice example of an 1888 San Francisco quarter. Next. Okay.
Okay, so throughout the history of the Carson City Mint, there was always some level of suspicion about the operations there. I think some of this may have been motivated by the fact that San Francisco was kind of the big brother, and the upstart nature of the Carson City operations. So in the Mint report in 1894, there's some question raised about the wastage of silver in the process of refining and coining. And as it turns out, a couple of gentlemen who were involved in Carson City Mint at the time died shortly thereafter. So this issue was never completely resolved. Okay, next slide. All right, and then here's another interesting coin. This is a 72cc quarter with a counter stamp on it. And the meaning of gold is still not entirely understood. One researcher suggested that gold was being minted into the quarters as a way of moving gold outside the mint without anyone finding out about it. So he went ahead and had the piece tested, and we find that that is actually not the case, although it's an interesting theory. This coin is 94% silver and only 6% copper. So here again, we see this idea that this was not perfect coin silver, which should probably be more like 10% copper. Copper was an expense in the mint, and it's listed as one of the expenses in the mint reports at Carson City. So it may have been cheaper just to use the higher percentage silver, and this may be one explanation for why these coins did not always wear particularly well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the mint was finally closed. The main reason cited was really the expense. It was remote, it was hard to get to, and that all combined to raise the costs of what was going on there, and ultimately closed down in the 90s. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we want to cover some of the resources available for seated collectors or folks who would like to be seated collectors. First best bet is the Liberty Seated Collectors Club.